I didn't expect my chest to tighten like that just from hearing his name again. Stefan's coming too, by the way. It was such a casual sentence, thrown in at the end of a group chat message about some random school reunion drinks. Half the people I barely remembered. A few I did. And then, him. Stefan. I stared at my phone longer than I should have, my thumb hovering over the screen like I could somehow scroll back in time instead of just up the chat. Because the Stefan I remembered wasn't just some old classmate. He was the guy. The one I never said anything to. The one I spent way too many classes pretending not to look at. The one who used to sit 2 rows ahead of me, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, laughing too loud, always surrounded by people. And yeah, straight. Or at least, that's what everyone, including me, assumed. I hadn't seen him in years. Not since graduation. Not since I left that version of myself behind, the quiet, awkward guy who kept everything bottled up and called it being normal. Now I was different. Or at least I told myself I was. More confident. More honest. Out. Still, my first instinct was simple. Don't go. I even typed it out. Can't make it, busy. Hovered over send. Deleted it. Because something about seeing his name again, it dragged up this unfinished feeling. Like a sentence I never got to finish. And I hated that. So instead I typed, I'll be there. The bar was louder than I expected. Dim lights, cheap drinks, that weird mix of nostalgia and second-hand embarrassment hanging in the air. People shouting over music, laughing too hard at stories that probably weren't that funny. I recognized faces, names slowly clicking into place. Arthur? No way, man! Dude, you look different. Where have you been hiding? Same conversations, over and over. I smiled, nodded, played along. But honestly, I was scanning the room. Looking for him. And when I finally saw Stefan, I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he looked completely different, but because he didn't. He was still tall, still had that same sharp jawline, the same dark hair, just a little shorter now, cleaner. Broader too. Filled out in a way that made him look solid. But it wasn't his looks that threw me off. It was everything else. He wasn't in the center of a group. He wasn't laughing loud. He wasn't even talking much. He was sitting off to the side, one elbow on the table, nursing a drink like he'd been there a while. Quiet. Distant. Alone. That didn't fit the version of Stefan I had in my head. Not even close. I hesitated. For a second too long. Then he looked up. And our eyes met. It was one of those moments that should have felt dramatic, but didn't. No music drop. No slow motion. Just recognition. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Then, slowly, he smirked. Arthur? God, even his voice hadn't changed much. I walked over before I could overthink it. Yeah. Didn't think you'd recognize me. He let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Are you kidding? You look. He paused, eyes flicking over me for just a second too long. Different. But yeah. I know it's you. There was something in the way he said it. Not teasing. Not casual. Just certain. I pulled out the chair across from him. You too, I said. Though, you're a lot quieter than I remember. That made him smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, he muttered, looking down at his glass. I get that a lot. There was an awkward pause. Not uncomfortable exactly, just unfamiliar. Like we were both trying to match who we used to be with who we were now, and it wasn't lining up. So, he said finally, glancing back at me. What have you been up to all these years? I shrugged. College. Work. Moved around a bit. Nothing too exciting. He nodded, like he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk. That was new. And you? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose like the question was heavier than it should have been. Stuff. he said. Life, I guess. That was it. No details. No stories. No bragging, nothing like the Stefan I remembered. I frowned a little. You always this mysterious now? That got a real reaction. A small laugh, more genuine this time. Something like that. Then his eyes met mine again. And this time, he didn't look away. You still overthink everything? He asked. I blinked. What? You used to, he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Back in school. Always looked like you were analyzing every conversation in real time. I stared at him. Because, yeah? That was exactly what I used to do. But I never thought he noticed. You remember that? I asked. Course I do. There was something quiet in his tone again. Something more grounded than I expected. And then he added softer. I remember more than you probably think. That hit harder than it should have. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of how close the table felt. Of how focused his gaze was. It wasn't the same as before. Back in school, if Stefan looked at you, it was quick. Casual. Distracted. This felt intentional. Heavy. Like he was actually seeing me. And for some reason, that made my chest tighten more than any dumb high school crush ever did. I cleared my throat. Well, I said, forcing a lighter tone. At least I grew out of it a bit. He tilted his head slightly. Did you? Our eyes locked again. And for a second, I didn't know how to answer that. Because the truth? Sitting there, across from him, after all these years, I felt exactly like that same guy again. Just older. Maybe not any braver. And definitely not ready for whatever this version of Stefan was. Because one thing was already clear. He wasn't the same as I remembered. Not even close. And I had a feeling I was only just starting to understand how much he'd changed. I didn't plan on staying long. That was the deal I made with myself before I even showed up. Have a drink, say hi to a few people, then leave before things got too weird. But somehow, I was still sitting across from Stefan an hour later. And the rest of the room had kind of faded out. People came and went around us. Someone dragged chairs, someone shouted my name at one point, but I barely registered any of it. Because talking to him now? It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't easy, exactly. But it also wasn't forced. It just flowed. So you moved out of the city? He asked, spinning his glass slightly between his fingers. Yeah. I nodded. Needed a change. Got tired of everything feeling the same. He gave a small, understanding hum. I get that. I studied him for a second. You do? He shrugged, but there was something heavier behind it. Yeah. More than I used to. That vague answer again. I leaned back slightly, crossing my arms. Okay, seriously. What happened to you? He looked up at me, one eyebrow lifting. What do you mean? I hesitated, trying to phrase it without sounding like a jerk. You used to be the loudest guy in every room. Now you're sitting in the corner barely talking. He didn't react right away. Just watched me. Then, after a second, he smirked faintly. Miss the old version of me? The question caught me off guard. Not really, I admitted. Just trying to figure you out. That seemed to land somewhere. His expression softened, just a little. People change, Arthur. Yeah, I said. But not usually this much. He let out a quiet breath, glancing away for a moment like he was debating something internally. Then he said, almost under his breath, sometimes they have to. That shut me up. Because whatever that meant, it didn't sound casual. And suddenly, I got the sense that I was poking at something deeper than I realized. So I backed off. Fair enough, I said, lifting my hands slightly. Didn't mean to interrogate you. He shook his head. You're not. A small pause. It's just complicated. There it was again. That word. Complicated. I didn't push further. Instead, I grabbed my drink, taking a slow sip, letting the silence settle for a second. And weirdly, it wasn't awkward. It was just quiet. Comfortable, even. Which felt new. Back in school, silence around Stefan never existed. There was always noise, always movement, always something filling the space. But now, it felt like he didn't need that anymore. Like he was okay just sitting there. With me. And that thought did something strange to my chest. So, he said after a moment, glancing back at me. You seeing anyone? I nearly choked on my drink. That was direct. I set the glass down, giving him a look. Wow. Straight to it, huh? He smirked slightly. Just asking. I hesitated. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wasn't sure how to say it. Back then, this question would have been easy. Now, it felt loaded. Not right now, I said finally. Then, after a beat, I added, What about you? He didn't answer immediately. Just held my gaze. And there it was again, that intensity. That way of looking at me like he was trying to read something beneath the surface. Then he shook his head lightly. No. Not your thing anymore? I asked, half joking. A faint smile touched his lips. Something like that. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. You're killing me, man. You always answer like you're hiding something. Maybe I am. He said it so casually that it almost didn't register. Almost. I leaned forward slightly, narrowing my eyes. Okay, now I'm definitely curious. Yeah? He said quietly. Yeah. Another pause. Longer this time. And something shifted. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but the air between us felt tighter. Like whatever we'd been dancing around this whole time was getting closer to the surface. Stefan's fingers tapped lightly against his glass. Once. Twice. Then he stopped. And said low, You ever think about high school? That wasn't what I expected. Sometimes, I said. Why? He didn't look away. About specific things. My stomach tightened slightly. Like what? He held my gaze for a second longer. Then finally looked down, exhaling softly. Nothing, he muttered. Just random. I frowned. Stefan. He glanced back up. And I don't know what it was, but something in my expression must have given me away. Because his face shifted. Subtle. But real. You had a crush on someone back then, right? He asked. My heart stopped. Just for a second. What? He shrugged, like it was nothing. I remember. You acted weird around someone. I let out a short, nervous laugh. That's not exactly rare in high school. True, he said. But this was different. My chest was tight now. Uncomfortably so. Because there was no way. He couldn't have known. I was careful back then. Painfully careful. No idea what you're talking about, I said, maybe a little too quickly. He watched me for a second. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not teasing. Not smug. Just knowing. Yeah, he said quietly. That's what I thought. And somehow, that felt worse. Because it sounded like he didn't believe me. At all. I looked away first this time, grabbing my drink again just to have something to do with my hands. My mind was racing. Did he actually know? Was he guessing? Or, you were really bad at hiding it, you know. I froze. My grip on the glass tightened slightly. What? I said again, quieter this time. Stefan leaned back in his chair, watching me carefully. Back then, he said. You thought no one noticed. My pulse was loud in my ears now. But I did. That was it. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Because there was only one question that mattered now. And I wasn't sure I actually wanted the answer. Still, I asked it anyway. Noticed what? He didn't respond right away. Just held my gaze again. And this time, There was no distance in it. No ambiguity. Just something direct. Something real. Something that made my chest feel like it was about to cave in. Then, finally, he said, "You." For a second, I genuinely thought I misheard him. "You what?" I said, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. Stefan didn't look away. Didn't smirk. Didn't try to soften it. "I noticed you," he repeated. Simple. Direct. Like it wasn't a big deal. Except it was. Because my brain was scrambling to catch up, flipping through years of memories. Every glance I thought was one-sided. Every moment I assumed went unnoticed. "That doesn't make sense," I said, shaking my head slightly. "I wasn't exactly." I gestured vaguely at myself. "Noticeable." He let out a short breath, almost like a quiet laugh. "You were. Just not the way you think." I frowned. "That's not helpful." "I'm not trying to be helpful," he said, leaning forward slightly now, his voice lower. "I'm trying to be honest." That word again. Honest. It sat heavier than it should have. I shifted in my seat, suddenly hyper-aware of everything, how close we were, how steady his gaze was, how my heart hadn't slowed down since he said it. "Okay," I said, forcing some control back into my voice. "Then be honest. What exactly did you notice?" He held my gaze for a second, then glanced down briefly, like he was choosing his words carefully. "When I'd walk into class," he said slowly, "you'd look up. Every time. Like you weren't trying to, but you did." My stomach dropped. "Sometimes you'd look away really fast," he continued. "Other times you didn't." I swallowed. Hard. Because that was painfully accurate. "And you always sat in the same spot," he added. "2 rows behind me. Slightly to the left." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "Okay, that's just creepy," I muttered, trying to deflect. But he didn't laugh. "You think I wouldn't notice someone paying attention to me like that?" he said quietly. I looked at him. Really looked this time. And suddenly, it clicked. Back then, Stefan was always the center of attention. Everyone noticed him. So of course, he noticed who noticed him. "Still doesn't mean anything," I said, though my voice had lost some of its edge. He tilted his head slightly. "No, no," I insisted. "That could have meant anything. Maybe I just thought you were loud." That got a small smile out of him. "I was loud." "Exactly." There was a brief pause. Then he leaned back again, studying me. "You gonna keep pretending?" he asked. My chest tightened. "I'm not pretending. Arthur." The way he said my name, calm, steady, a little firmer this time, it made it harder to keep dodging. "I'm not calling you out to mess with you," he added. "I'm saying it because I remember it clearly." I hesitated. Because part of me still wanted to deny it. Keep it buried. But another part was tired. It had been years. And sitting here, with him looking at me like that, like he already knew. What was the point? So I exhaled slowly. "Yeah," I admitted. The word felt heavier than it should have. But also, weirdly relieving. Stefan didn't react right away. Just watched me. Waiting. I ran a hand through my hair, shaking my head slightly. "It wasn't a big deal," I added quickly. "Just stupid high school stuff." "Didn't seem stupid." I looked back at him. "It was one-sided." That slipped out before I could stop it. And the second it did, I regretted it. Because something in his expression changed. Not dramatically. But enough. "Was it?" he asked. My stomach twisted. "What's that supposed to mean?" He didn't answer immediately. Just leaned forward again, resting his forearms on the table, closer now. "Back then," he said slowly, "I didn't really get it." "Get what?" He held my gaze. "Why I kept noticing you back. That knocked the air out of me." I blinked. Once. Twice. trying to process it. What? I said, almost under my breath. Stefan exhaled softly, like he'd been holding that in longer than he meant to. I told myself it was nothing, he continued. That I was just bored in class. Or that you were just there. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Couldn't. But it wasn't just that, he said. And I knew it. My heart was pounding now. Loud. Unsteady. Then why didn't you say anything? I asked, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. You serious? I frowned. Yeah. Arthur, he said, shaking his head slightly. Back then, I barely understood myself. That made sense. More than I wanted it to. I had a girlfriend half the time, he added. Friends who expected me to act a certain way. A version of myself I was trying to keep up. I leaned back slightly, absorbing that. So what? I said slowly. You're saying you, what? Like me back? He didn't answer right away. Just looked at me. And that silence? It said more than anything else. Stefan. Yeah, he said quietly. Just like that. No hesitation this time. No deflection. Just the truth. And somehow, that hit harder than everything else combined. Because this whole time, all those years I spent convincing myself it was one-sided. It wasn't. I let out a shaky breath, running a hand over my face. That's messed up, I muttered. He huffed out a small laugh. Yeah. A little. A little? I looked back at him. Do you have any idea how much easier that would have made things? Yeah, he said. I do. There was something in his voice again. Regret. Real, quiet regret. And? I pressed. You just, what? Ignored it? I didn't know what to do with it. That didn't stop you from noticing. That landed. He nodded slightly. Fair. A pause settled between us again. But this one felt different. Heavier. Full of everything we didn't say back then. And everything we were finally saying now. I looked at him, really looked. At the way he carried himself now. The quiet. The restraint. This wasn't the same guy from high school. Not even close. You weren't lying earlier, I said. About what? You really did change. He held my gaze. Yeah, he said softly. I did. Another pause. Then, before I could stop myself, I asked. So what changed? This time. He didn't dodge the question. But the way his expression shifted? It told me I might not be ready for the answer. I should have let it go. That question. So what changed? It wasn't casual. And the second it left my mouth, I knew I'd just stepped into something deeper than I planned. Stefan didn't answer right away. He leaned back slightly, eyes drifting past me for a second, like he was deciding how much to say, or whether to say anything at all. Then he exhaled. Slow. Controlled. Life, he said at first. I raised an eyebrow. That's not an answer. A faint smile tugged at his lips, but it didn't stick. I know. Silence stretched for a moment. Then he looked back at me. And this time, there was no deflection. No one really knew me back then, he said. The shift in his tone made my chest tighten a little. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, he paused, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his glass. Everyone knew the version of me I showed them. The loud one. The confident one. The guy who didn't think too much. I let out a quiet breath. Yeah, that tracks. He nodded slightly. But that wasn't really me, he added. That didn't surprise me as much as it should have. Because sitting here now, it was obvious. So what happened? I asked again, softer this time. He hesitated. Then, I hit a point where I couldn't keep that up anymore. There was something heavy in that sentence. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated. Just real. After school? I asked. Yeah, he said. A year or two after. He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table again. Things started catching up to me. Stuff I ignored. Stuff I didn't want to deal with. I didn't interrupt. Didn't joke. Just listened. I kept doing what I thought I was supposed to do, he continued. Dating girls. Going out. Acting like everything made sense. His jaw tightened slightly. But it didn't. I swallowed. Because I knew that feeling. Too well. And eventually, he said, it just cracked. The word hung there. Cracked. I frowned slightly. How? He let out a quiet breath through his nose. Panic attacks, mostly, he said, like it was nothing. That caught me off guard. What? Yeah, he said, glancing down briefly. Didn't see it coming either. First time it happened, I thought something was seriously wrong with me. My chest tightened again, but for a completely different reason this time. That's rough, I said. He shrugged lightly. It forced me to stop ignoring things. Like what? He looked up at me. And this time, there was no hesitation. Like the fact that I wasn't as straight as I kept pretending to be. There it was. Clear. Direct. No ambiguity. I felt something shift in my chest again, something quieter this time. Not shock. Just understanding. Yeah, I said softly. That'll do it. A small, real smile appeared on his face. Yeah. We sat there for a second. No rush to fill the silence. Then I asked carefully, did anyone know? He shook his head. Not at first. And now? Another pause. Then, some people. I nodded slowly. That explains a lot. He glanced at me. Yeah? Yeah, I said. You're not trying so hard anymore. That seemed to land. He looked down at the table, then back up at me. Guess not. There was a quiet moment. Then, before I could stop myself, I said, so where do I fit into that? The question came out more honest than I intended. More personal. And the second it was out there, I couldn't take it back. Stefan's expression shifted. Subtle. But enough. What do you mean? He asked. You brought up high school, I said. You noticed me. You liked me. Saying it out loud still felt strange. So I'm just trying to figure out. I hesitated slightly. What that means now. There it was. The real question. Not about the past. About this. About us. Stefan didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on mine, steady, unreadable for a second. Then he leaned in slightly. Closer than before. You really don't see it? He asked quietly. My stomach tightened. See what? He held my gaze. And for a second, everything else faded again. The noise. The people. The entire bar. It was just him. You're the first person I thought about when I started figuring things out, he said. That hit harder than anything else tonight. I blinked. What? After everything, he continued, his voice calm but heavier now. After I stopped pretending, after I actually let myself think about it. He paused. Just for a second. Then, you came back into my head. My chest felt tight. Too tight. Why? I asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't look away. Because you weren't just some random crush, he said. You were different. Different. That word again. But this time, it meant something else. Something deeper. And when I saw your name in that group chat, he added, I almost didn't come. That surprised me. Why? A faint, nervous smile touched his lips. Because I wasn't sure if I could just sit across from you and act like none of that ever happened. I exhaled slowly. Yeah, I muttered. You're doing a great job of not doing that. That made him laugh, quiet, but real. Yeah, I guess I am. Another pause. But this one? It felt like the edge of something. Like we were right there, right at the point where things either stayed safe or changed completely. I looked at him. At the way he was watching me now. Not like before. Not like in high school. This wasn't casual. This wasn't uncertain. This was intentional. And it made my pulse pick up again. So what now? I asked. Simple question. But it carried weight. And Stefan? He didn't hesitate this time. He leaned in just a little closer. Close enough that I could actually feel the shift in the space between us. And said low, I don't want to pretend this is just nothing. My heart was beating way too fast for something that was technically just a conversation. I don't want to pretend this is just nothing. Stefan's words just sat there between us. Heavy. Real. And way too honest for me to brush off with a joke. I let out a slow breath, leaning back slightly in my chair, not because I wanted distance, but because I needed a second to think. Okay, I said, nodding once. Then what is it? He didn't answer immediately. But he didn't look unsure either. That was the thing that kept throwing me off tonight. Back in school, Stefan was confident, but it was loud, performative. This was quiet. Grounded. And somehow, way more intense. It's not random, he said finally. Seeing you again. I frowned slightly. It kind of is, I said. We just ended up at the same thing. He shook his head. No. I mean what it's doing to me. That made my chest tighten again. I didn't respond right away. Didn't trust myself to. Because I had a feeling I already knew where this was going. And that scared me a little. Not in a bad way. Just in a real way. You ever had something you thought you got over? He continued. And then it just comes back the second you see the person again? I let out a quiet breath. Yeah, I said. I have. He held my gaze. Then you get it. I did. That was the problem. Because sitting here, across from him, I couldn't pretend I didn't feel it too. That pull. That unfinished feeling from years ago. Except now, it wasn't just some quiet crush hidden behind awkward glances. Now it was right in front of me. Looking back. And what are you expecting me to do with that? I asked. He tilted his head slightly. I'm not expecting anything, he said. I just don't want to ignore it. I studied him. You could have, I pointed out. You almost didn't even come tonight. Yeah, he said. And I'm glad I did. Something about how simply he said that. It landed harder than it should have. I looked down at the table for a second, tracing the edge of my glass with my finger. Back then, I said slowly, I spent a lot of time trying to convince myself it didn't matter. He didn't interrupt. I told myself it was just a phase. That I'd get over it. That you were just some guy I couldn't have. I let out a quiet breath. And eventually I did get over it. Or at least I thought I did. Stefan's voice was softer when he spoke. And now? I looked back up at him. And yeah, there was no point lying. Now I'm not so sure. That was the first time I said it out loud. Not just to myself. To him. And the second it left my mouth, something shifted again. Not tension. Not uncertainty. Just clarity. Stefan nodded slightly, like that confirmed something for him. Okay, he said. Okay? I repeated. Yeah. I raised an eyebrow. That's all you've got? A small smile pulled at his lips. For now. I huffed out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. You're still kind of annoying, you know that? Yeah, he said. I've been told. There was a brief pause. Then he leaned forward again. Not as intense as before. But closer. More deliberate. So let me ask you something, he said. Okay. If I had said something back then, he continued, if I hadn't ignored it, would you have wanted that? My stomach tightened instantly. That question. It hit somewhere deeper than everything else. Because it wasn't about now. It was about the version of me who sat 2 rows behind him, overthinking every glance. The version of me who never got an answer. I exhaled slowly. Yeah, I said. No hesitation this time. Yeah, I would've. Stefan held my gaze. And I could see it, that flicker of regret again. But it didn't linger. Because this wasn't about back then anymore. So what about now? He asked. There it was. The real question. Simple. But loaded. I didn't answer immediately. Because I wanted to be sure. Not just reacting to the moment. Not just getting pulled in by nostalgia. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it got. This wasn't just about who he used to be. It was about who he was now. The quieter version. The honest one. The one sitting in front of me, not hiding anything. And yeah, I wanted to know him. Now, I started, then paused, choosing my words carefully. Now I think we don't have the excuse of being dumb teenagers anymore. A small smile appeared on his face. Fair. So if we do this, I added, it's not just some what if thing. He nodded. I know. It's real. I know. There was a beat. Then yeah, I said. That was it. Simple. But it meant everything. Stefan didn't say anything right away. But the way his shoulders relaxed slightly, the way his expression softened, it told me enough. Yeah? He asked, just to be sure. Yeah. And for the first time that night, he smiled fully. Not the restrained version. Not the guarded one. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen back in school. And somehow, that version of him? I liked it a lot more. We sat there for a second, either of us rushing to say anything else. Because we both knew. Something had just shifted. And there was no going back to pretending this was just 2 old classmates catching up. You want to get out of here? He asked after a moment. I glanced around the bar. The noise. The crowd. The past. Then back at him. Yeah, I said, standing up. And just like that, we walked out of that place together. Not as who we used to be, but as something new. Something we probably should have been. A long time ago. The second we stepped outside, everything felt quieter. Not just because we'd left the noise of the bar behind, but because something between us had settled. Or maybe shifted is a better word. The air was cooler than I expected, a light breeze cutting through the leftover warmth from inside. I shoved my hands into my pockets out of habit, glancing over at Stefan as we walked. For a few seconds neither of us said anything. And weirdly, it wasn't awkward. It felt like we were both just adjusting. To this. To us. You always this quiet after making big decisions? I asked finally. He let out a small breath of a laugh beside me. Depends, he said. You always this calm about them? I glanced at him. I'm not calm. That got a real reaction. He looked over, eyebrow lifting slightly. No? I shook my head. My brain's kind of catching up right now. Yeah, he said. Same. We slowed near the corner of the street, stopping under a dim streetlight. The glow hit him just enough to catch the edges of his face, his eyes sharper now in the dark. For a second, either of us moved. Then he said, quieter, You good? It was a simple question. But it didn't feel casual. He meant it. I took a breath, considering it. Yeah, I said. I think so. A small pause. Just didn't expect tonight to go like this. Me neither. Another beat. Then I added, half smiling. Thought I'd come, have a drink, maybe cringe at some old classmates, and leave. He smirked. Same. Instead, I trailed off. He tilted his head slightly. Instead? I looked at him. Really looked. At some point, this stopped feeling like a coincidence. That landed. I could see it in the way his expression shifted, subtle, but real. Yeah, he said quietly. It did. There was that tension again, Not uncomfortable. Just present. Like something was building, even in the silence. And this time? Neither of us rushed to break it. We just stood there. A little too close now. Close enough that I was suddenly aware of everything again, the space between us, the way his shoulders squared slightly, the way his gaze dropped for half a second. To my lips. Then back up. And yeah, that didn't help my I'm totally calm situation at all. So, I said, my voice a little lower now. What happens next? Stefan didn't answer immediately. He took a small step closer. Not dramatic. Not rushed. Just intentional. I think, he said slowly, we stop overthinking it. I let out a quiet breath. That's rich coming from you. He huffed a soft laugh. Fair. Another step closer. Now there was barely any space between us. And suddenly, everything felt a little louder again, just not the outside world. My heartbeat. My breathing. The way my chest felt tight but not in a bad way. You okay with this? He asked. There it was again. That difference. Back then, he wouldn't have asked. Now? He made sure. And that mattered more than I expected. Yeah, I said. No hesitation. This time, I meant it fully. His eyes searched mine for a second, like he was making sure. Then he nodded slightly. And closed the distance. It wasn't rushed. Wasn't messy. It was careful. Like he was giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. So when his hand brushed lightly against my side, hesitant at first, it sent a sharp, electric feeling through me that made my breath hitch. And then he kissed me. And everything else just disappeared. It wasn't like anything I imagined back then. Back then, it was all fantasy, overthinking, building it up into something unrealistic. This was real. Warm. Grounded. His hand steadied slightly against me, not pulling. Not pushing, just there. And I felt myself relax into it without even realizing. Like my body caught up before my brain did. When we pulled back, it wasn't abrupt. Just enough space to breathe. But not enough to fully separate. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then I let out a quiet, slightly breathless laugh. Okay. He smiled. Okay? I nodded. Yeah. That was. I paused, searching for the word. Not what I expected either. That a good thing? He asked. I looked at him. At the way he was watching me, not guarded, not uncertain. Just open. Yeah, I said. It is. Something in his expression softened again. And for a moment, we just stood there like that. Close. Comfortable. Real. No past hanging over us anymore. No. What if? Just this. Then I glanced down the street, exhaling lightly. So, I said, what now? Round two? Or do we pretend to be normal human beings and walk somewhere? He smirked. I think we're past pretending anything's normal. Fair. A small pause. Then he nodded down the street. There's a place a few blocks from here. Quieter. I raised an eyebrow. Quieter sounds good. We started walking again, this time side by side, but closer than before. Not touching, but close enough that it felt intentional. And as we moved forward, I realized something. This wasn't just about finally getting something I wanted years ago. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about something new. Something that actually had a chance. And honestly, that felt a lot better than any high school fantasy ever did. The place he took me to was nothing special. Just a small late-night cafe tucked between two darker buildings, half-lit sign, a couple of people inside, low music playing in the background. But compared to the bar? It felt like a different world. Quiet. Slower. Like we could actually hear ourselves think again. We grabbed a table by the window, sitting across from each other, but this time, the distance felt different. Less like space. more like something we were aware of. So this is your idea of a smooth follow-up? I asked, glancing around. Coffee after that? Stefan smirked slightly. Figured we should at least try to act like normal people for 5 minutes. I huffed a quiet laugh. Too late for that. Yeah, he said. Probably. There was a brief pause while we ordered, nothing fancy, just something warm to hold on to more than anything. And once the waiter left, the quiet settled in again. But now, it wasn't just comfortable. It was full. Like everything we hadn't said yet was sitting right there between us. I leaned back slightly, studying him. You know what's weird? I said. What? I thought if I ever saw you again, it'd be disappointing. That made him raise an eyebrow. Disappointing? Yeah, I said. Like I'd realize I built it up too much in my head back then. He watched me carefully. And? I shook my head, a small smile forming. It's not that. What is it then? I held his gaze. It's different. That word again. But this time, it felt complete. Not confusing. Not uncertain. Just true. Stefan nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. It is. A quiet settled between us again. Then he added softer. Better or worse? I didn't even have to think about it. Better. Something in his shoulders eased at that. Not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed. And for some reason, that mattered. Good, he said. We sat there for a bit, just talking. Not about anything heavy this time. Work, random stories, stupid memories from school. Except now, it didn't feel like we were stuck in the past. It felt like we were rewriting it. Or maybe just seeing it clearly for the first time. At one point, I caught myself just watching him while he talked. The way he spoke now, more measured, more thoughtful. The way he actually listened when I responded. And yeah, this version of Stefan? I wouldn't have recognized him back then. But I think, if I had, I would have liked him even more. You're staring again, he said suddenly. I blinked. What? He smirked. You used to do that too. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help the small smile. Shut up. Just saying. He shrugged. Some things don't change. Yeah, I said. Some things do. He held my gaze for a second. Then nodded. Yeah. We finished our drinks slower than necessary. Neither of us rushing to leave. But eventually, the moment came. It always does. We stepped back outside, the night a little quieter now, the streets less crowded. And for a second, we just stood there again. That same feeling from earlier. Like we were right at the edge of something. But this time, it didn't feel uncertain. So, I said, slipping my hands into my pockets again. Guess this is where we do the awkward goodbye. Stefan tilted his head slightly. Does it have to be? I looked at him. No, I admitted. Not really. A small pause. Then he stepped a little closer again, not as hesitant this time. More sure. I don't want this to be a one-time thing, he said. Simple. Direct. Just like earlier. And honestly, I didn't want that either. Good, I said. Because that would be kind of a waste. That got a real smile out of him again. Yeah, he said. It would. Another quiet moment. Then he reached out, slow, like he was still giving me time to pull away. I didn't. His hand brushed against mine. Then stayed. Not grabbing. Not forcing. Just there. And I let my fingers settle against his. Natural. Easy. Like it didn't need to be a big deal. Text me when you get home? He asked. I raised an eyebrow. You worried about me? Maybe. I smirked slightly. Yeah. I will. He nodded once. Then, after a brief hesitation, he leaned in again. This kiss wasn't tentative. It wasn't testing anything. It was sure. Like we both already knew. When we pulled back, I let out a quiet breath. Okay, I said again. He smiled. Yeah. I stepped back slightly this time, not to create distance, but because I knew if I didn't, we'd just stay